The weatherman had been wrong before, but not tonight. By 4 in the afternoon, the sky above Ridgewood, Pennsylvania, had turned the color of old pewter, dense and low, pressing down on the rooftops like a held breath. By 5:30, the first sleet was tapping against windows up and down Oakage Street, a quiet residential block of 2-story colonials and aging bungalows where the gutters needed cleaning and the sidewalks buckled where maple roots had been winning a slow war for decades. Darius Carter pulled his work truck into the driveway at 5:45 and sat with the engine idling, listening to the weather radio finish its warning. Winter storm advisory through midnight. Temperatures dropping to 18 degrees by 10 p.m. He turned the engine off and stepped out into the cold. Darius was 38 years old, built in the practical way of men who lift and carry for a living. Broad through the shoulders, steady through the stance. His dark brown hands were calloused, knuckles rough from years of pipe wrenches and crawl spaces, and he had a habit of standing wider than he needed to, as if bracing against wind that wasn't always there. He wore a Carhartt jacket faded to old rust, and steel-toed boots resoled twice. He had close-crop coils going a little gray at the temples, and a way of pausing before he spoke that some people mistook for slowness and others recognized as care. He had been a plumber for 14 years at Ridgewood Plumbing and Mechanical, residential work that took him into the intimate disorder of other people's homes, reading a house the way a doctor reads a patient. His wife Monique had died of a pulmonary embolism 4 years ago. She had been 34 and healthy, home from a teachers' conference in Denver, and simply didn't wake up. Darius had called it a lot of things in the months that followed before arriving at the quieter, duller word that seemed truest: unfair. Their son Eli was 10 now, small for his age, with his mother's warm brown eyes and a gap-toothed smile that appeared rarely but entirely. Eli had struggled in school, not because he wasn't bright, but because the letters on the page rearranged themselves when he stared at them. His reading specialist, Dr. Oakes, had explained dyslexia in terms Darius eventually understood. Eli's brain was wired for pattern recognition in ways that made reading require twice the effort for half the output. He was in 3rd grade and reading at a 1st grade level, and Darius watched his son work harder at something that came easily to other children than most adults worked at anything. The house at 14 Oakage Street was a 2-bedroom bungalow with a covered porch, a furnace that made a sound like an irritated cat, and a kitchen that smelled faintly and inexplicably of cinnamon. Darius rented it from Blackwell Properties for $940 a month, cheap for Ridgewood, and stayed because of the location. 3 blocks from Eli's school, 2 blocks from the bus stop. Eli was at the Dawsons next door. Helen Dawson watched him on late work days, an arrangement that had started as temporary and become foundational. Darius was planning to pick him up, make something warm for dinner, and be in bed by 9. He had just reached his porch steps when he saw the moving truck. It was idling across the street, diesel engine rumbling, hazards blinking orange in the gray sleet. That alone wasn't unusual. People moved in, people moved out. But then he saw the pile of belongings on the sidewalk. A rolling suitcase, cardboard boxes, a child's backpack shaped like a ladybug, a lamp without its shade, and standing beside them, arms wrapped around herself against the cold, a woman he did not recognize. And beside her, so close they were touching at the shoulder, a little girl. The girl was maybe 7 years old, wearing a yellow rain jacket that was appropriate for April and useless for January. Her hair plastered to her face in dark, wet ropes. She was shaking. Darius could see it from across the street, a full-body tremor that had moved past the voluntary kind into the involuntary, the kind that means the body has decided to take over the thermostat on its own. The woman was arguing with a man who stood on the open ramp of the moving truck. He was heavy-set, 50s, wearing a reflective safety vest over a flannel shirt. He held a clipboard. He had the posture of someone who had delivered bad news many times before and had stopped feeling bad about it. "Please," the woman said. Darius couldn't hear the words clearly, just the shape of them carried on the wind in fragments. Just one more night. I have nowhere to take her right now. It's 18 degrees. Ma'am! The man's voice was louder, flatter. I have a signed order. Storage unit's closed for the night. Everything's here now. She's 7 years old. Look at her. I'm sorry, I got 2 more stops tonight. Darius crossed the street. He hadn't decided to. He had simply started moving, the way you move your hand from a hot burner. Decision and action arriving at the same moment. He stepped between 2 parked cars and onto the sidewalk. Up close, the woman was younger than he'd estimated from across the street, or early 30s, tall with sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that were doing the very precise work of not crying, the jaw slightly set, the breathing deliberate. She wore a gray wool coat that had been good once and was now missing 2 buttons. Her shoes were canvas sneakers, thoroughly soaked. Everything okay here? Darius asked. The moving man turned. Private matter, friend. I can see that. Darius looked at the woman. She hesitated. It was a particular kind of hesitation, not uncertainty about the answer, but about whether to trust the question. The little girl looked up at Darius. Her eyes were the same dark shade as her mother's, and at the moment they were doing something complicated, assessing him with a seriousness that didn't belong to a 7-year-old's face. The look of a child who had learned to read adults quickly. I live right across the street, Darius said. 14 Oakage. You can stay tonight, get warm, figure out tomorrow when it isn't 18 degrees and sleeting. The woman stared at him. You don't know us. No, Darius said, but I know it's 18 degrees and sleeting. Another hesitation. The man with the clipboard had stepped back, apparently willing to wait the 2 minutes this would take. The little girl tugged her mother's coat sleeve. Mama, she said quietly. The woman, Emily, Darius would learn her name, looked at her daughter, then back at Darius. Some calculation ran behind her eyes that he wasn't privy to. Then she said, Okay, thank you. They grabbed what they could. The suitcase, the backpack, 2 boxes. The rest would stay on the sidewalk overnight, which meant some of it would be ruined by morning. Darius carried the suitcase and one of the boxes. Emily carried the other box with one arm and her daughter with the other. The little girl's legs wrapped around her mother's waist, face pressed into her shoulder. They crossed Oakage Street in the dark and the sleet, and Darius opened his front door, and they went inside. The furnace made its cat sound and settled. Darius turned the thermostat to 72 and went for towels. Bathrooms down the hall, he said. Take whatever time you need. I'll find some dry clothes. He came back with 2 of his own thermal shirts, a pair of sweatpants with a drawstring, and a set of Monique's socks he'd never been able to throw away, wool, striped green and white. She had bought them for a camping trip they'd taken in 2017 and worn them constantly for 2 winters afterward. He set them outside the bathroom door without overthinking it. The little girl, Lily, Emily told him, in the tight, efficient way of a person rationing information, came out first, towel wrapped around her shoulders like a cape, wearing the thermal shirt as a dress that reached her knees. She stood in the hallway and looked at the house with open curiosity, taking inventory. You have a lot of tools, she said, looking at the pegboard in the mudroom where Darius kept the overflow from his truck. I fix pipes, he said. Broken ones. Those are the only kind worth fixing. Lily considered this with the gravity it apparently deserved, then followed him to the kitchen. He made hot chocolate from a tin of Hershey's powder. He made 3 mugs. Emily emerged from the bathroom in the borrowed sweatpants and thermal shirt, the striped socks on her feet, her wet hair loose. Without the gray coat, she looked younger and more tired, the kind of tired that isn't fixed by sleep. Thank you, she said, sitting at the kitchen table. You don't have to explain anything tonight, Darius said. The back door opened and Eli came in from the Dawsons, shaking sleet from his jacket. He stopped in the doorway and regarded the strangers at his kitchen table with the same measuring look Lily had used in the hallway. This is Emily and Lily, Darius said. They're staying tonight because of the storm. Lily, this is Eli. Lily looked at Eli. Eli looked at Lily. Do you have any games? Lily asked. I have Minecraft, Eli said. I don't know how to play that. I can show you. They disappeared toward Eli's room. Darius heard the door open and a moment later the particular chime of the game starting. Emily let out a long, slow breath. Her hands relaxed around the mug. She told him that night a partial version of the truth. The way people tell partial truths when they are testing the water, when they want to know if someone is safe before they hand over the real thing. She said she had been renting an apartment across town. She said the landlord had decided to sell the building. She said the eviction had been handled poorly and quickly, and she hadn't had time to find somewhere else. She had been a third-grade teacher at Garrison Elementary for 5 years before the school year's enrollment cuts had ended her contract the previous June. Since then, she had been substitute teaching, which paid by the day and came with no guarantees. "I have a lead on something full-time," she said, "in Mill Haven, about 30 miles from here, but it doesn't start until February." Darius didn't ask about Lily's father. Emily didn't mention him. They talked for another hour, the storm pressing against the windows, the furnace cycling on and off. At some point, Eli appeared to report that Lily had learned the basic controls for Minecraft and was actually pretty good for a beginner. Lily appeared behind him to say that Eli had explained everything very clearly. Both of them looked pleased with themselves and each other. Darius put Lily on the couch with a spare blanket and set up the air mattress for Emily in the small office room beside Eli's bedroom. It was the room Monique had used for planning and grading papers. The room Darius had converted into storage after she died, and then gradually unconverted when it began to feel like he was trying too hard to not remember. There were still 2 of her bookshelves in there, still full, and a framed photo on one shelf, one of the few he'd left out on purpose, of a beautiful black family smiling too big at the camera on a summer day that had felt endless at the time. "Is that okay?" he asked Emily, standing in the doorway. She looked at the room, at the bookshelves. "It's more than okay," she said. He went to bed at 10:30. He lay in the dark and listened to the storm for a while and thought about Monique, which he still did most nights. He thought about the way the little girl had said mama in that particular tone. Not panicked, not demanding, just stating something, a direction, and the way Emily had moved her whole body in response, like a compass needle finding north. He fell asleep thinking about that. 3 mornings later, Darius was at a job on Fern Avenue, a burst pipe in the crawl space of a house that had been poorly insulated, ice expanding in the copper until it gave way, when his phone buzzed. Emily's name had been in his contacts for 2 days by then. Exchanged practically the way you exchange numbers with the person who needs to reach you if something happens to the kids. There's a car parked across the street. It's been there since 7. I don't recognize it. And I've been watching, and the driver hasn't gotten out or looked at the house they're supposedly in front of. I might be overreacting. Darius looked at the text for a moment. Then he typed, "What color? What kind?" "Black sedan, 4-door. Stay away from the front windows. Don't answer the door. I'll be back by noon." He was back by 11:40. The car was gone when he arrived. He drove around the block twice before pulling in. Habit from a boyhood in a neighborhood where you learn to notice what didn't belong, where being a black man who pays attention can be the difference between fine and too late, even when you've done everything right. Nothing. He went inside. Emily was in the kitchen with Lily, who was at the table with a worksheet from school. She had been enrolled at Ridgewood Elementary that week in the same building as Eli, which had solved one logistical problem and made Lily inordinately happy. Emily was standing at the counter, arms crossed, in the posture she adopted when she was working something out that she didn't want to say out loud. Darius sat down at the table. He said without preamble, "Who knows you're here?" She didn't pretend not to understand the question. "I didn't tell anyone," she said. "I paid for the move in cash. I haven't used my credit card since for a while. I use a prepaid phone, but someone found me before." Darius said, "The eviction." The word landed in the room like a stone into water, and Darius watched the ripples move across Emily's face. She looked at Lily, who was focused on her worksheet with the concentration of a child pretending not to listen. "Lily," Emily said, "can you go read in the other room for a few minutes?" Lily picked up her worksheet and her pencil without complaint and went. She was, Darius had noticed, unusually skilled at reading the temperature of a room. Emily sat down across from Darius. She was quiet for a moment, her hands flat on the table as if she were studying them. "The landlord who evicted me," she said, "he works for my father. His name..." And when she said it, it sat in the air between them with the weight of a name that has been used as a lever for a long time. Victor Blackwell was 59 years old, founder and principal owner of Blackwell Properties, LLC, which held commercial and residential real estate across 4 counties in western Pennsylvania. He had built the company from a single strip mall purchase in 1989 into something that now employed 43 people and touched the lives of several thousand more through rental agreements and development contracts with the city of Ridgewood. Darius knew the name from his rent check. He had been paying it for 3 years without connecting it to anything larger. Emily Harper was Victor Blackwell's daughter. She had taken her mother's maiden name at 19. Partly as inheritance, her mother had died when Emily was 16, and partly because the distance from the name Blackwell had felt like oxygen. She had put herself through Clarion University on student loans, graduated with a teaching degree, and spent a decade building a life that had nothing to do with her father's world. Lily's father, a man named Patrick Reeves, had left before Lily was born. No argument, no confrontation, just a diminishing and then an absence. Emily had not chased him. 3 months ago, Victor Blackwell had reappeared. He'd found her through Lily's school enrollment records or municipal voter registration, she believed. He called her cell phone. The conversation was polite in the way of calls from people who've decided politeness is a tactic. He said he wanted to reconnect. He said he was getting older and thinking about family. She said she would think about it. Then he sent a man named Daniel Cross to her school. Daniel Cross was 44, owner of Cross River Capital, a private equity firm in Pittsburgh. Blackwell had been doing business with him for 6 years. Within 40 seconds of introduction, Cross had made a remark about women being better suited to certain roles. Emily said it told her everything she needed to know. Victor Blackwell wanted his daughter married to Daniel Cross. Emily didn't know precisely why. Social strategy, financial entanglement, the habit of a controlling man arranging the world to specification, but she knew the shape of it. The conversation stopped being requests and became conditions. When Emily refused, things moved quickly. Her substitute teaching contracts at Garrison Elementary were not renewed. Her apartment's landlord informed her the building was being sold and her month-to-month lease would not be extended. Her car went to the shop and came back with a bill 3 times the estimate. He didn't threaten me directly, Emily said. He doesn't do anything directly. He adjusts the environment, removes the ground from under things. The man in the sedan, Darius said. Probably one of his people. He has a property manager, a man named Greer, who handles things he doesn't want to handle himself. Darius was quiet for a moment. He knows you're here, Emily said. He knows I'm in Ridgewood somewhere. He doesn't know I'm at your address yet. She said the last word with the careful emphasis of someone who has thought about the trajectory of things. You have documentation of any of this? Darius asked. Emily looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. Yes, she said. Some of it, I kept records. There are some emails, some financial documents I copied before I lost access to the account he had set up for Lily's educational trust. He'd always insisted on managing the trust himself. I found some things in there that weren't about the trust. What kind of things? She hesitated. The kind that would interest people whose job is to notice them. The call came at 11:17. Darius's phone showed a 724 area code, Western Pennsylvania. Mr. Carter. The voice was even, unhurried, the voice of a man accustomed to the telephone as an instrument of management. My name is Victor Blackwell. I believe you've offered hospitality to my daughter. Darius was standing in the kitchen. Mr. Blackwell. I want to be direct. My daughter is going through a difficult period. She can be impulsive. I'm asking that you encourage her to reach out so we can make proper arrangements. I appreciate the concern, Darius said. A pause. I understand you rent from Blackwell Properties. I do. And your son attends Ridgewood Elementary. Darius set his hand flat on the counter. Something quiet and clear moved through him. Not anger exactly, but its first cousin. A hardening of resolve that arrived without drama. That's right, he said. I'm sure you've invested in the stability of your situation there. Raising a child alone is difficult work, Mr. Carter. Darius said, if Emily wants to talk to you, she'll reach out. I don't think there is anything else for me to say. Another pause, longer. I hope you'll reconsider your position, Mr. Carter. Good night. The line ended. Darius stood in the kitchen for a while after that, not moving. He thought about Eli asleep in his room, about the school 3 blocks away, about the lease he signed every 12 months on a handshake, understanding with a property management company whose principal owner had just called him at 11 o'clock to remind him of his vulnerabilities. He thought about Monique, who had been a teacher and who had believed, sometimes to a fault, that you don't look away from things. He went and knocked lightly on the office room door. Emily was awake. Of course she was. He told her about the call. "You're not leaving," Darius said. She looked up at him. "You're not leaving," he said again. "Not in the middle of the night. Not tomorrow. We're going to think about this properly." He made coffee. Emily spread a legal pad on the kitchen table and they went through it. The documents were on a password-protected USB drive in the lining of Lily's ladybug backpack. Paranoid or brilliant, Darius decided. Probably both. She had printed copies of 14 emails spanning 8 months. Screenshots of 3 wire transfers from Lily's educational trust to a Delaware account with no connection to any school or educational purpose. She had a contract between Blackwell Properties and Cross River Capital, whose attachment schedule referenced a Millhaven development project, permits granted with unusual speed. Darius was a plumber, not a lawyer. He understood the documents the way he understood a system in a wall, not by what everything was called, but by where the pressure was going. "This isn't just about you not marrying Cross," Darius said. "No," Emily said. "I don't think it ever was. I think I'm a complication, a loose piece." She turned her coffee mug slowly. "He loves Lily, or something that functions like it. He sent her cards, gifts, but love, the way he practices it, has conditions. The trust gives him leverage. As long as he controls the money designated for her education, he has a conversation piece, a reason to stay in contact, a pressure point." Darius thought about this. "You said you have a contact," he said. "Someone who might be interested in these documents." Emily nodded slowly. "My college roommate's husband. He works in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Pittsburgh. We haven't spoken in 2 years. I don't know if he's still there." "Is there a reason you haven't reached out?" Darius asked. "Fear," Emily said, simply and without self-pity. "And I wasn't sure I had enough. I didn't know if what I had would just make things worse without being enough to matter." They sat with that for a moment. "How much is in the educational trust?" Darius asked. "As of the last statement I saw, $412,000. Darius set his coffee down. "What are the wire transfers to the Delaware account?" he asked. "The 3 I have records of total about $80,000. "That's not Lily's college fund moving around," Darius said. "That's something else." Emily met his eyes. "I know." It was Helen Dawson, their neighbor, who noticed the men first. She called Darius at 9:43 the following evening while he was washing dishes and Emily was helping Lily practice reading. Helen was 71 years old, a retired school librarian whose observational habits had only sharpened with the years, and who kept her porch light on at all hours, partly for safety and partly because she liked to know what was happening on her street. "Darius," she said without preface, "there are 2 men walking slow on your side of the street. One of them stopped and looked at your back fence." Darius dried his hands. "Go inside and lock your door, Helen." He went to Emily. "We need to go," he said, "right now." Emily didn't ask questions. She had been ready for this in the way that people who have been living on alert are ready. Bags by the door since that first day, mental list already made. She woke Lily, who came awake confused and then trusted her mother's face, and got her shoes on without complaint. Darius loaded them into his truck. He took the alley behind the house to Ridgewood Avenue, then south to Route 30, then east for 12 miles to a cabin that belonged to his coworker Dennis Pratt, who used it for deer season and had given Darius a spare key 2 years ago in exchange for fixing the water heater. Dennis was in Florida visiting his sister. Darius had texted him from the road. "Need your cabin for a few days? We'll explain. Sorry. Key under the mat. No problem. You okay?" "Will be." The cabin was a 2-room structure set back from a gravel road in Jefferson Township, heated by a wood stove and a propane backup, with running water and no reliable cell signal except on the south-facing porch. It smelled of pine and old flannel, and was, Darius thought, exactly the right distance from anything that could find them easily. Lily fell asleep in the truck, and Darius carried her inside. She didn't wake when he laid her on the bunk bed in the back room and pulled the quilt up to her chin. Emily stood at the wood stove, warming her hands. In the propane lantern light, she looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just set it down. Not because the journey was over, but because she was about to lift it differently. "I'm going to call David tomorrow," she said. David was the name of her college roommate's husband, the one at the U.S. Attorney's office. "I should have done it months ago." "You were protecting Lily," Darius said. "I was afraid," Emily said, "which isn't quite the same thing." She turned from the stove. "Thank you for all of this. I know it's cost you something." "Nothing I've paid that wasn't worth paying," Darius said, and he meant it. He found, examining the statement from several angles, that it was entirely true. It was Emily's idea for Darius to go to the Blackwell Properties main office. She would go to the bank, an institution in Mill Haven, where she had kept a safety deposit box under her mother's maiden name, a precaution she'd taken 18 months ago when the situation with her father was still just a situation and not yet a siege. The safety deposit box held printed copies of everything, plus a thumb drive and a notarized letter she'd written to herself documenting the sequence of events with dates and names. They planned it over coffee at the cabin at 6 o'clock in the morning. Lily still asleep in the back room, the wood stove ticking quietly. "He'll see you coming," Emily said. "He'll know something's moving." "That's fine," Darius said. "I want him to know something's moving. I want him thinking about me while you're at the bank." She looked at him carefully. "You don't have to be the one to go there." "I rent from him," Darius said. "I have a standing reason to walk in that door." He paused. "And I want to." She almost smiled. "Why?" "Because he called my house at 11 at night and reminded me about my son's school," Darius said. "And I find I have some feelings about that." The Blackwell Properties main office was on 5th Street in downtown Ridgewood, on the second floor of a building that Blackwell himself owned, which Darius privately noted with the specific irritation of someone who has been annoyed for a while and is only now naming it. He wore clean clothes, his better jacket, and went in at 10 o'clock in the morning. The receptionist was young and professional. Darius gave his name and said he was a tenant at 14 Oakage Street and needed to speak with someone about his lease. He waited 11 minutes in a lobby with a mounted television and a table of commercial real estate brochures. Then a man named Greer, Raymond Greer, according to his card property manager, which matched the name Emily had given, came to collect him. Greer was compact and carefully groomed with the watchful quality of someone whose job was to observe. He led Darius to a conference room, not an office. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Blackwell," Darius said. "Mr. Blackwell doesn't take unscheduled meetings," Greer said. "I handle tenant matters." "That's fine," Darius said. "I want you to take him a message." Greer looked at him. "Tell him that the materials Emily Harper had in her possession have been delivered to someone whose interest in them is professional. Tell him that someone is David Kowalski at the U.S. Attorney's office in Pittsburgh. Tell him that David has been there for 9 years and has an interest in financial irregularities in real estate development." Darius watched Greer's face very carefully while he said this. "Tell him Emily isn't planning to disappear again. She's planning to stay in Ridgewood and raise her daughter here, and she'd appreciate it if the environment stopped being adjusted." A silence. "You can also tell him his granddaughter is well," Darius said, "if that matters." He stood, picked up his jacket, and left. He walked to his truck on 5th Street and sat in the driver's seat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. His heart was beating harder than the situation strictly required. He took 2 slow breaths. Then he called Emily. "Done," he said. "Bank 2, she said. "David has everything. He called while I was in there. He says it's more than enough to open an inquiry. He's moving it to the fraud unit this afternoon." Darius exhaled. "How did Greer look?" Emily asked. "Like a man doing math," Darius said. Spring came to Ridgewood early that year, cautious at first and then fully. The way good things sometimes arrive, hedging, then committed. Victor Blackwell and Daniel Cross were indicted by a federal grand jury in late February. The charges covering wire fraud, misappropriation of trust funds, and bribery of municipal permit officials in connection with the Mill Haven development project. The case was reported in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on a Wednesday. Darius read it at the kitchen table with a second cup of coffee, which felt appropriate. Emily had found full-time work at Ridgewood Elementary, teaching third grade starting in the spring semester. She had signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment on Sycamore Lane, 4 blocks from Oakage Street, in a building not owned by Blackwell Properties. She had good lighting and a porch and a neighbor with a window box of geraniums that Lily admired every morning on the way to school. Lily had been assessed by Dr. Oakes in late January. She had the same characteristic as Eli, the same rewired pattern recognition. Letters that moved, a brain that processed spatial information with unusual facility and text with unusual effort. She had been assigned the same reading specialist program. She and Eli studied together at the Dawsons on Tuesdays and Thursdays with a patience for each other's pace that the adults around them found quietly remarkable. Darius made pancakes on Sunday mornings. He had started doing it the first Sunday after the storm for the 4 of them, and it had become a pattern without being decided. Through repetition, through everyone showing up, Emily would arrive at 9 o'clock with Lily, who would go directly to Eli's room without knocking, a privilege formally granted around week 3. Emily would sit at the kitchen table with coffee and the Saturday crossword, which she did in pen. Darius would make the batter and heat the griddle, and they would talk the way people talk when they have stopped performing ease and arrived at it. There was no dramatic declaration between them, no cinematic clarity in the rain. There was instead the slow accumulation of Sunday mornings and shared logistics and conversations that started about school meetings and ended somewhere much further, and the knowledge of being known by someone in the daily specific ways that actually constitute it. In April, walking back from the park with the children running ahead through newly green grass, Emily said something about the summer and used we, not self-consciously, just naturally, the pronoun arriving before she thought about it. She glanced at Darius when she realized, and he said, "That works for me." And that was more or less that. What Darius thought about later on quiet nights after Eli was asleep was the moment of crossing the street. The storm, the little girl in the yellow jacket shaking in the cold. The way the decision had arrived without the feeling of deciding. Just a direction and his feet moving and then the rest of it. He had expected to help 2 people survive a bad night. He had not expected the way a household changes when it starts to include people who look for you when they come in the door, the small gravitational reorganization of a space around more than one center. He had not expected that the cinnamon smell in the kitchen, always inexplicable to him, would turn out to be Emily's preference in candles, something she'd set on the windowsill above the sink on her 3rd morning without asking because she'd already stopped waiting for permission. Eli was reading at grade level by May. Dr. Oakes called it the best response to the intervention she'd seen in 4 years. Darius didn't tell her that Eli had started reading to Lily every night at bedtime. Lily, who was new to the school and listened to the stories with complete attention, and sometimes corrected Eli when he skipped a word, and that accountability had done more for his reading than any worksheet. He thought sometimes about the phone call from Victor Blackwell at 11:17 on a January night, the flatness in the older man's voice when he'd referenced Eli's school. He thought about standing in a conference room on 5th Street, saying the words he'd prepared, and the particular feeling of having nothing to offer except the truth, and deciding the truth was sufficient. It had been. The house at 14 Oakage Street had a new lease. The property management company was in receivership, its assets under court review, and Darius's rent had been temporarily frozen. His attorney, Sandra Keene, who had taken the case on reduced fee because she said it was the kind of case she went to law school to handle, thought the final resolution would be reasonable. He planned to stay. There was, after all, a school 3 blocks away, a bus stop 2 beyond that, and a house that smelled of cinnamon on the windowsill. Sunday mornings that had become quietly and without announcement the fixed point around which the week arranged itself. The storm had come and the storm had passed and left the world rearranged as storms do. He had crossed the street. He had opened the door. That was the whole story when you stripped it to the bone. A man who saw something wrong and moved toward it instead of away, and found that the space on the other side was larger than anything he had expected, planned for, or in all honesty deserved, though he was learning that deservingness was the wrong frame. What you got was what you chose. What you built was what you showed up for. Every Sunday morning, pancakes on the griddle, two kids arguing about the plate with the most blueberries, coffee going cold while they talked. He wouldn't have changed a single wet and freezing second of that January night. He wouldn't have stayed in the truck for anything in the world.